When my son's wife thought I was just a retired man with nothing. Good thing I stayed quiet, because 6 months later she showed up with her father and a contract, but her face changed when she saw I met her the day my son brought her home for dinner. I was on the porch fixing the railing when they pulled into the driveway. Torn work shirt, mud on my boots from the drain I had spent the better part of the afternoon clearing out back. It had been blocked for 2 weeks, and every time it rained, the low corner of the yard turned into a shallow pond. I had been putting it off and finally ran out of excuses that morning. That is the kind of thing that happens when you live alone in a house that was built to hold more people than it does now. The repairs pile up quietly, and then one day you look around and realize you have been negotiating with them. I heard her laugh before I saw her face. It came through the open window of my son's car when he pulled in, before either of them had the door open. Easy and bright, the kind of laugh that knows it is being listened to. Not performed exactly, but aware. There is a difference, and I have spent enough time around people to know it when I hear it. My son came around the front of the car, and she came around the other side, and they walked up together. He had his good jacket on, the navy one he saves for things that matter. I wiped my hands on a rag and came down the porch steps. My son said, "Dad, I want you to meet someone," and I could hear the careful happiness in his voice, the kind a person has when something is going well and they are trying not to crowd it. She shook my hand, firm, direct. I remember that. She looked at me and smiled, and then her eyes moved, the way eyes do when they are reading a room, and the room happens to include a person, the porch, the yard, the flower beds my wife had planted that I had been maintaining badly for 11 years, the old truck in the driveway with the cracked windshield I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. She took all of it in over about 3 seconds, and I watched her land on a conclusion, polite smile, already decided. I had seen that look before in 37 years of doing business. I had seen it across negotiating tables and in bank offices, and in the faces of men who showed up to look at properties I was selling. Men who thought because I arrived in a work truck instead of a sedan, they had found themselves an easy transaction. I had learned a long time ago not to correct it right away. Information is worth more when the other person does not know you have it. We had dinner. I had made a pot roast, which my son has requested every time he has come home since he was about 14 years old. She said it was wonderful. She meant it, I think. She asked about the neighborhood, about how long I had lived in the house, about my years before retirement. Good questions, the kind that show you have been paying attention. I liked her mostly, in the way you like someone when you are still measuring them. There was a warmth to her that I did not think was false. But there was also something underneath it, a small engine running, the kind that is always calculating even when the face above it is laughing. I recognized it because I have spent 37 years around people who had it. Some of them were the best business partners I ever had. Some of them were not. After dinner, she helped clear the table without being asked. She asked about the photograph on the bookshelf, the one of my wife and me on the steps of the 3rd building we ever bought, taken the afternoon we closed. We are both squinting in the sun, and my wife is holding the keys up toward the camera like a trophy. I told her that was my wife, that she had passed 11 years ago, and she said she was sorry, and she looked at the photograph for a moment longer than she needed to. I noticed that. My son walked her out when it was time to go, and then came back in alone for a few minutes. He sat at the kitchen table and had the look he gets when he wants to say something, but is arranging it first. Eventually, he said, "She really likes you, Dad." I said that was kind. He said she thought it was sweet, the way I kept things simple. I looked at him for a moment, and he looked back, and he meant it as a good thing, as a compliment, a warmth. I told him I was glad she had a nice time. After he left, I stood at the kitchen window for a while with the lights off and the yard dark outside. I was not angry. I was not offended. I was paying attention. I said nothing about the properties that night. Not that night, not after, not for a long time. My wife and I had agreed on that principle early, back when we were still scraping together the down payment on our 2nd building and driving a car with a broken heater through the winter, because we had decided the money went into the properties first. You do not wear what you have. You just have it. We had shaken hands on that in our own kitchen one evening when our son was still small enough to be asleep before 8, and we had never broken it. Not once. There were 8 properties by the time she walked into my life. I had bought the first one in 1988 with money saved from 6 years of double shifts at the plant, 1,100 square feet of tired duplex on a street that nobody was interested in at the time. My wife thought I was out of my mind. She came around when the first rent check arrived, and she held it up to the light and said, "Raymond, I think you might actually know what you were doing." I still have that in my memory like a photograph. Her standing at the kitchen counter in the house we were renting at the time, holding a checkup to a 40-watt bulb. The second property came 2 years later. The third 3 years after that. By the time our son was in middle school, we had 4 buildings, and we had stopped telling people about them. Not because we were ashamed, but because money changes the way people talk to you, and we did not want that. We wanted Sunday dinners and neighbors who knocked on the door to borrow things, and a son who understood that you work for what you have and you do not announce it. My wife was strict about this, stricter than me. She had grown up watching money make her family strange, and she had decided a long time before she met me that she was not going to let that happen. When she got sick the first time, I almost sold 2 of the buildings to pay for experimental treatment that the insurance would not cover. She told me absolutely not. She said, "Raymond, we built those so our son has something after us, and we are not dismantling them because I am sick and we are scared." She said it plainly, sitting upright in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm, and she meant every word. I did not sell. She recovered that time. 4 years later, she did not. She left me her half of everything we had built together. I kept building, slowly, carefully, the way you do when the person who kept you grounded is gone and all you have left is the discipline she taught you. 2 more properties in the years after. Then a final one 6 years ago, a 12-unit building on the east side of the county that I had been watching for a long time and finally moved on when the price dropped to where it made sense. 31 units total across 8 properties. Every one of them paid off. Every one of them in a trust that my wife and I had designed together with our attorney 17 years ago and that I had updated carefully in the years since she passed. My son knew we were comfortable. He did not know the specifics. I had always planned to sit down with him properly, with the documents in front of us, and walk him through everything. I had been postponing it the way you postpone things when they do not feel urgent. And then one day I realized they had become urgent and I had run out of the easy versions of the conversation. Over the months after that first dinner, I watched how she moved through things. She had a way of steering conversations that was very good, smooth enough that most people would not notice they were being steered. She would start somewhere harmless and work her way to somewhere specific, always with warmth, always with what sounded like concern. She asked about my health. She asked whether the house was a lot to manage alone. She asked whether I had a financial advisor, because things could get complicated at my age, on a fixed income. Her father, she mentioned, knew people, very reputable. She said it the way people say something is a favor when they have already decided you need saving and have identified themselves as the one to do it. I told her I kept things simple. I said it without any particular emphasis, just as a statement of fact. And she smiled at the word simple the way you smile when something confirms what you already believed. I watched that happen and I noted it and I said nothing else. She started dropping by the house, always with a reason, always plausible. A dish she was returning, something my son had left at their apartment. She would come in and sit down and we would have coffee and the conversation would be easy and pleasant and then it would arrive somewhere interesting. Had I thought about what would happen to the house eventually? Did I understand property taxes on a house this size? Had I ever considered a reverse mortgage as a way to free up some cash without the burden of a sale? Her father, she said again, had helped several older neighbors in the area structure their assets more efficiently. She said efficiently, the way a person says a word they have been told is attractive to a certain kind of audience. I answered her questions honestly. I told her I kept things simple. I did not perform confusion. I did not pretend to be something I was not. I simply answered what she asked without volunteering anything beyond it. I am 64 years old and I have been managing complicated financial arrangements for nearly 4 decades. I know the difference between a question asked out of curiosity and a question asked as reconnaissance. The call from my son came on a Tuesday night in early spring. He said they had been talking. Those 4 words had acquired a specific weight by then. Every time I heard them, a front was moving in and I braced for what was behind it. He said her father wanted to help me structure my assets, protect me, make sure everything was in order. Smart planning. He said it quickly, rehearsed, and I could hear underneath the rehearsal the discomfort of a man who has been handed a script he is not entirely sure he believes. He said he just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I asked my son whose peace of mind we were really talking about. He laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound. He said, "Dad." I said I appreciated the concern. I said I would think about it. Then I hung up and I sat in the kitchen for about 20 minutes without moving. Not because I was upset. I was working through it the way I work through most things, slowly, from the outside in, trying to identify exactly what I was looking at before I decided what to do about it. Then I called my attorney. He and I have known each other for 22 years. We met at our church and discovered we had both grown up in the same part of the city and both watched our fathers work themselves into early graves for wages that did not reflect the work. We had become friends over those years, in the specific way 2 men become friends when they respect each other's judgment and share a long history. He updated my will and trust documents 6 years ago, and he knows every property I own, every structure, every arrangement. I told him what had been happening. I went through it carefully, the visits, the conversations, the way the questions had been building towards something. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Raymond, do you want to move anything around?" I said not yet. I said I wanted to see what they were actually after before I showed my hand. He said that was probably wise. He said to call him when I was ready and he would clear whatever time we needed. I told him to keep his calendar open. The visits continued. She was consistent. I will give her that. Patient in the way that requires either genuine concern or very good training. She never pushed too hard in a single conversation. She built it gradually, one small stone at a time, the way you build a wall when you want it to look like it was always there. Each conversation left me with slightly more to think about than the last, and each one arrived naturally from the one before it. In early March, she sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug and asked me directly whether I owned the house outright or whether there was still a mortgage. I told her there was no mortgage. Her fingers moved slightly on the mug, a small adjustment, the kind a person makes when a piece of information lands in a way they were hoping it would. She asked when I had paid it off. I said 2003. She said that was wonderful, that a paid-off house in this neighborhood was worth serious money now. Did I know what comparable sales were running? I said I had a rough idea. She said her father's firm had actually been quite active in this area recently. She said if I ever wanted an informal valuation, just to know where I stood, he would be happy to take a look. No pressure, no obligation. I thanked her. I said I would keep that in mind. After she left, I stood at the window and watched watched her get into her car. She sat there before starting the engine, phone in hand, and I watched her thumb moving. I did not know who she was calling. I had a reasonable guess. 2 weeks later, my son came by on a Saturday morning, alone. He came in and sat at the kitchen table and had the look he used to get as a boy when he was about to ask for something he already knew was complicated. The one where he sets his jaw a certain way and looks at the surface in front of him instead of at me. He said she had been doing some research. He said he hoped I would hear him out. I told him to go ahead. He said that from what she had looked into, the property tax situation on a house this size could become difficult for someone on a fixed income over time. He said her father had suggested a structure where the house could be transferred into an LLC for tax purposes. He was quick to clarify, nothing else, just the house, just for protection. It would protect me. Her father would help set it up, co-sign on the filing if I needed support. I looked at my son. I said, who would own the LLC? He looked at the table. He said it would be a joint structure, me and them together. I asked him to say that back to me slowly. He rubbed the back of his neck. He said it would be a way for the family to manage the asset collectively. Her father did this kind of thing all the time. It was just smart planning. He said smart planning the way people say it when they are trying to end a conversation, to close it off before it can be examined too closely. I asked him directly, was this his idea or hers? He did not answer right away, which was my answer. I told him I needed to think about it. I asked him to give me a couple of weeks. He seemed relieved to have a delay rather than a refusal. Before he left, he hugged me at the door and I put my hand on the back of his head for a moment, the way I used to when he was small. He is still my son. Whatever was happening around him, that had not changed and was not going to change. That afternoon, I called my attorney. I said I was ready to start. We spent the better part of 2 evenings going through everything. He laid it all out in front of me the way he does methodically, every document in its place, every question answered before I had finished forming it. 8 rental properties, addresses and current assessed values lined up in a column. 31 units total, everyone paid off. The trust my wife and I had established in 2009 after a long conversation with him about what we wanted and what we feared. The trust named my son as sole beneficiary with language so specific and so airtight that no spouse, no in-law, no outside party of any description could access or transfer any portion of it without my son's explicit and documented consent and the involvement of his own independent legal counsel. My wife had insisted on that particular language. She had thought about it carefully, and she had known exactly what she was asking for and why. My attorney had some thoughts about whether we should update the language given what had been happening. I listened to them. I decided the language was fine as written. My wife had been thorough. She had always been thorough. He put together a 1-page summary document. Plain language. 8 properties listed by address. Estimated current market value beside each one. Figures he had pulled from recent comparable sales and from the county assessor's current records. 3 sentences describing the trust structure. My son's name at the bottom as the sole and only beneficiary. And at the very bottom of the page, a single line with the combined estimated value of all 8 properties. Just over $2.3 million. I looked at that number for a moment. It had grown slowly over 37 years. One decision at a time, one building at a time, one repaired roof and replaced boiler and renegotiated insurance policy at a time. I had not looked at the whole of it in one place in a while. It looked different when it was in a single number on a single line. I put the document in a folder and put the folder in my desk drawer, and I waited. Her father called 6 weeks later and asked if he could come by on a Saturday afternoon. He said he had been thinking about our situation and wanted to share some thoughts. I said, of course, please come. He arrived in a car I recognized, top of the line. He was well dressed in the way of a man who has dressed well for long enough that it no longer looks like effort. He had the handshake of someone who practices it, firm and held for exactly the right duration. He admired the house when he came in, said it had good bones, said the craftsmanship on the trim work was something you did not see anymore, said the lot was an exceptional size for this part of the street. I had heard men like him talk about houses before. They are always assessing. It is not criticism. It is just how they see the world, the way a carpenter looks at a table and sees joinery before he sees furniture. We sat in the front room and I offered him coffee and he accepted and I brought it out, and we settled into a conversation that he steered very skillfully from pleasantries to market conditions to estate planning to what he called the particular challenges facing retired homeowners in appreciating markets. He talked about tax efficiency and generational wealth and the difficulty of probate and the advantages of holding real property through properly structured entities. He was smooth, genuinely smooth. Under other circumstances, I think I might have enjoyed the conversation professionally. He knew his material and he presented it without condescension, which is rarer than it should be. I listened without interruption. I asked a few questions, none of them leading, enough to indicate I was following along. He was reading me the whole time and I could see him calibrating, deciding that I was a capable man who needed to be spoken to plainly, which I am. He was not wrong about that. He was wrong about a number of other things. Then he reached into the bag he had brought and he unfolded a document on my coffee table. I picked it up and read it carefully. It was a draft LLC operating agreement, 15 pages, professionally prepared. My name was listed as a founding member with a 40% ownership interest. Her name and his name together were listed as founding members with the remaining 60%. The assets described for contribution to to the LLC included, listed in the first schedule, this house, my house. The one my wife had chosen from a listing in a newspaper in the spring of 1989. The one where my son had grown up. The one where we had buried 3 cats in the backyard over the years, and where there is a mark on the doorframe of the kitchen where my wife measured my son's height every birthday until he turned 16 and declared himself finished with it. 11 years since she passed, and I had never painted over that doorframe. He explained the agreement carefully. He said it was purely protective in nature. He said I would remain in the house for as long as I wished to. That was not in question. The LLC would simply hold title to the property as an asset, which would accomplish several things. It would insulate the property from probate complications. It would allow the family to manage it collectively and make decisions about it efficiently. It would provide tax advantages that a personally held property could not offer. He said he had set up structures like this for friends of his own, older men who had assets and wanted to make sure they were managed intelligently. He said it was exactly what he would do for his own father if his father were in my position. He slid the document slightly closer to me on the table as he finished. I looked at it for a moment longer. Then I set it down and I looked at him and I asked him what he knew about my financial situation. He said what his daughter had shared with him: a retired man, fixed income, a paid-off house in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly over the past decade. He said it with the easy confidence of someone who has researched a position before walking into the room. He said it, I could tell, because he believed it. I asked him whether he had done any independent research before preparing this document. He said he had not felt that it was necessary. I nodded. I told him to give me just a moment. I stood up and walked to my desk, and I opened the drawer, and I took out the folder, and I came back, and I sat down across from him. I set the folder on the coffee table next to his LLC agreement. I told him I wanted to share something before we went any further. I opened the folder and slid the one-page summary across the table toward him. He picked it up with the same casual confidence he had brought to everything else, the confidence of a man who has not been surprised in a transaction for a long time. And then I watched his face. It did not collapse dramatically. It did not go red or white in the sharp theatrical way of a man caught in a lie in a film. It changed the way light changes in a room when something large moves across the sun outside, slowly, gradually. The temperature of it shifted first, and then the color, and then the whole quality of the attention behind his eyes. He read the page once from top to bottom, then he went back to the top and read it again. 8 properties listed by address, street by street, the county they sat in, the year each one was acquired, the estimated current market value beside each address, figures drawn from recent comparable sales. The trust structure described in plain language, 3 sentences, my son named as sole beneficiary, the language about consent and independent counsel in the second sentence, and at the bottom, beneath a short horizontal line, the combined estimated total, just over $2.3 million. He set the page down on the table between us. She had been sitting beside my son on the couch across the room. I had been aware of her there during the whole conversation, watching, evaluating. She leaned over now when the page was set down, and she read it from where she sat. And then she looked up at me. It was not anger. It was not embarrassment, not precisely. It was a specific expression that I have seen a small number of times in my life, always in rooms where the facts of a situation have just been substantially revised. It was the look of someone who walked into a room with complete confidence in the layout of it and found the walls in entirely different places than expected. A recalibration happening in real time, right there on her face, because she was not the kind of person who could hide that kind of thing quickly enough. My son was looking at the summary sheet. He turned it over as though there might be something on the back. There was not. He set it down. He looked at me with an expression I did not know how to read, and I was not sure I wanted to try right then. I picked up the LLC agreement. I told her father I appreciated the work that had gone into preparing it. I told him my attorney and I had reviewed something very similar to this document approximately 2 weeks prior. I told him that the trust structure my wife and I established in 2009 already accomplished everything this agreement proposed to accomplish, and accomplished it with substantially stronger protections for my son's interests, better tax treatment, and the complete absence of outside parties in any capacity. I said I had been managing these assets for 37 years without difficulty. I said my son had always been the sole beneficiary of everything I had built. That had never been in question, and it was not going to be. Her father looked at me. Something behind his eyes had shifted. He was recalibrating too, just more quietly. Then he looked down at the table for a moment. He folded the LLC agreement along its original crease and put it back inside his jacket. He stood up and he said it had been a genuine pleasure meeting me. He said it with the polished ease of a man who says things like that so often they have worn smooth. He meant none of it. We both understood that, and it was fine. He had come into this room with a position, and the position had not held. That happens in business. I did not hate him for it. I did not particularly respect it either, but I understood it. She stood when he did. She gathered her things from where they were beside her on the couch, and before she turned toward the door, she looked at me one more time. It was the last look that stayed with me afterward. Not the yard sale look from the first night, the polite smile and the already decided. Not the warm, careful look she had worn through all the months of steering and suggesting and dropping by with returned dishes. Something that had been underneath all of those looks had come to the surface. It was the look of someone who had been operating with a map of a place and had just discovered that the map was wrong. Not the minor wrong of a single incorrect detail, but the foundational wrong of a document that was describing somewhere else entirely. I had never been what she thought I was. I had been something else the whole time, and now she knew it, and I knew she knew it, and there was nothing else to say. My son stayed. Her father said something brief and courteous to my son on the way out, and she said something too. I could not hear what. Then the front door opened and closed, and it was quiet. My son did not move from where he was sitting for a long time. The late afternoon light came through the front window, the way it always does at that hour, a particular angle that my wife always said made the room look like a painting, everything slightly gold and slightly more itself. I had sat in this room in this light for 31 years. I knew it the way you know the sound of your own house settling at night. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I brought 2 cups back and set one in front of my son. He had both hands flat on the table surface. I sat down across from him. He said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" I sat with that question for a moment before I answered it. I wanted to answer it honestly rather than just usefully. I told him part of it was old habit. My wife and I had kept the specifics private for so long that it had become second nature, something I did not think about because it had become part of how we operated. I told him part of it was that I had always planned to sit down with him properly, with the documents, and walk him through everything, and I had been postponing it the way you postpone things when they do not feel urgent. And I told him that when I saw how things were developing, part of me had wanted to understand what I was dealing with before I showed my hand. I told him that part I was less proud of. I could have found ways to tell him earlier, and I had not found them. He looked at his coffee cup. He said he felt like an idiot. I told him not to. I told him I had let it happen by staying quiet too long. If I had sat down with him 2 years ago the way I should have, there would have been nothing to fill in. People fill gaps with what makes sense to them. I had left a gap. That was on me more than it was on anyone else. He said he still should have asked. He said he should have noticed when things started steering somewhere and pushed back instead of going along with it. He said he knew why he had not. It had been easier not to. Letting her handle things had become a habit, and the habit had let him avoid thinking too carefully about what was being handled. He said he was ashamed of that. He said it plainly, like a man admitting something he had already decided he was going to admit. I told him shame was only useful if it led somewhere. He asked me what I thought he should do now. I told him that was between him and his wife. I said I had no opinions about his marriage that were mine to give. What I had was time, and a conversation I should have had with him a long time ago that I intended to have now. I told him I wanted to walk him through everything properly, the way I had always planned to. The properties, the trust, what each arrangement meant, what his mother had wanted for him, how it all worked, and why we had built it the way we did. He said he would like that, so we sat there. I started from the beginning. The first building, the duplex on the street nobody wanted, the decision my wife and I had argued about and then agreed on, the logic of it, a working man's version of patience. Put money into something real, something that generates income, something that grows slowly but does not disappear. I told him about the second building and the third. I told him what the early years had been like when the properties were leveraged, and we were one bad month away from being in trouble, and we slept carefully and moved carefully and did not take unnecessary risks. I told him about the winter of 1994, when the boiler in the third building failed and the insurance company disputed the claim, and I worked weekends for 4 months to cover the repairs out of pocket because letting that building go was not something we were willing to do. I told him about the deal I had almost made in 2001 that would have overextended us badly, a large commercial property on the edge of the county that a developer was selling at what looked like a good price. I had been excited about it. I had run the numbers 3 times, and then I sat down with his mother one evening after he was asleep and laid it out for her, and she listened to everything I said, and then she said, "Raymond, we are not doing this." She said it quietly. She said, "We are not borrowing against what we have built to reach for something we do not need." I argued. She was not interested in my arguments. She said, "I know what you want, and I understand why you want it, but this is not the right one, and you know it too." She was right. The developer sold to someone else, and that someone else was in significant financial trouble within 3 years. I had always thought about what would have happened if she had not sat me down that night. I told him about the trust. The evening we sat down with our attorney and thought through carefully what we wanted, what we feared, what we believed about how money moves through families and what it does to them. His mother had been very clear about what she wanted. She wanted the assets protected in a way that meant they could not be accessed or influenced by anyone except him, her son, acting with full information and his own counsel. She had thought about it, and she had decided, and she had insisted. She had always been better at saying the hard, true thing plainly than I was. My son's jaw tightened at his mother's name. It always does. It has done that since he was 12 years old, since the year she first got sick. A small thing, a held thing. I noticed it the way I always notice it, and I let it sit. He listened to all of it without checking his phone once. He sat at that kitchen table the way he used to sit at it when he was doing homework, all the way present, all the way in. I had forgotten that about him. In the years since he moved out, I had seen him mostly in short stretches, Sunday dinners, brief visits, always with something else nearby competing for his attention. I had forgotten what it felt like to have him in a room the way he was in a room when something mattered to him. Somewhere in the middle of it, he said, "She thought you were just a guy who fixed things." I said, "I am." He said, "Dad." I said I meant it. I told him I drove the same truck I had driven for 15 years because it ran fine and I knew it. it. I told him I bought my jeans at Walmart because jeans were jeans. I told him I fixed my own pipes because I knew how to do it, and I liked knowing how to do things, and there was nothing about a folder in a desk drawer that changed any of that. I had built the properties because I believed in them, and because his mother believed in them, and because we had both grown up understanding that security was something you built quietly over a long time and then lived inside of without talking about it. He smiled a little at that. He said, "That's very you." I said, "I know." He asked me one more thing before he stood up to leave. He asked if I was angry. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told him no. I told him I had been watchful, and I had been careful, and maybe I had felt something that was close to satisfaction at the end of it, not in a cruel way, but in the way you feel when something you spent a long time building holds up under pressure. You get to see what it is actually made of. I said that was probably not the most virtuous thing to admit. I said the harder feeling was something I did not have a clean name for. It was somewhere between regret and relief. The feeling of a man who had let things drift a little longer than he should have and had caught them just before they drifted too far. The feeling of having the conversation I should have had 2 years ago, finally, in the kitchen where we should always have had it. I said the most important thing was that he knew now, all of it, and that going forward, I was not going to postpone the things that needed to be said. He hugged me at the door, held on for a moment. I put my hand on the back of his head the way I did when he was small. Then he went out and I listened to his car back down the driveway. I stood at the door for a moment after the headlights were gone. The neighborhood was quiet. The oak tree in the front yard, the one his mother planted the year we moved in, was coming into its spring leaves. I had been meaning to have the lower branches trimmed and I kept forgetting. I would call someone about that this week. I went inside. I walked through the kitchen where the cups were still on the table. That particular evening light was almost gone now, just the last of it along the windowsill. I turned the light off last and went upstairs. I put the folder on the nightstand on my side of the bed, the same side I had slept on for 31 years. The other side still had the small lamp she had chosen, the one with the blue base, and I had never moved it, and I was not going to. I lay there for a while in the quiet. 37 years of decisions made one at a time, carefully, without announcement. An old truck and Walmart jeans and a cracked windshield and 31 units across 8 properties, and a trust that held, written by a woman who had known exactly what she was doing and exactly what she was protecting. I slept the way I have learned to sleep in the 11 years since she passed. Not perfectly, not without the weight of it, but soundly. The sleep of a man who built something slowly and watched it hold. 3 weeks later, my son came by on a Sunday morning, alone. He sat down and said they had been doing a lot of talking. Real talking, he said. The kind they should have been doing for a while. He said she had admitted that her father had pushed the idea harder than she had told him at the time. He said she was embarrassed. He said they were working through it, that it was not easy, but they were in it. He said she wanted to apologize to me in person. He asked if I was open to that. I said of course. She was his wife. That made her family. I had not given up on family in 64 years and I was not about to start. He nodded. He looked at the table for a moment and then he looked up and he said, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." I told him there was never a version of this where I gave up on him. Not ever. That was not something he needed to thank me for. That was just the job. He smiled. He said he knew. I made eggs the way he likes them. We ate at the kitchen table where 37 years of decisions had been made, where his mother used to sit across from me with her coffee and her opinions and her stubbornness that I had loved more than I had ever known how to say, where the morning light came through the window and made everything look, just for a moment, like exactly enough, because it had always been exactly enough.